Now that we discussed empty overriding for rotation whenever it comes to dice, let's use the example that I've been preparing, and that is we'll take this cube, scale it out a bit, and we'll Control R, add a loop in the middle, just raise this middle edge up, and we'll just alt click this loop, press Control B in order to bevel, and from here we could press D, and our circle is at 32 as specified in our D helper. However, in order to put a loop exactly where I want, I'm just going to place a loop cut here so I have an adjacent dot, and we'll just bring our circle in and press Shift T in order to just bring that in, and we'll just click and apply and Control A to apply visual geometry to mesh. And at this point we can just merge some of these near doubles. We could shift click mark, press M to jump over to merge tool, and actually just drag any points that look like they possibly have a straggler nearby. Press C to cancel if you end up accidentally selecting the wrong point. And I believe that actually does it. So by keeping the geometry pretty sparse, it's easily controllable. But the main thing we want to do here is take the object in edit mode and rotate it. So that way if we press Alt G, Alt R, Alt S to rotate things, we don't actually have that level of control back. So the first thing we'll do is sharpen it, because our Control tilde settings are set to mark seams. So that means that all of our boundaries are marked. And if we go in face mode, we can press L and we can select things that are isolated by boundary selections if we use UV seams. So selecting this face, we could press Control plus to just grow this out. And I have the hotkey of Shift tilde, which under the select menu is mapped to select boundary loop, where I just select a series of things and then it'll just select a boundary loop. But from here, we'll just shift click mark, press B, and just bevel that out slightly. And over the last few examples, I got a little bit more experimental with the surface, but this time I actually want to hold the surface in place, like you're seeing me doing now, where I didn't replace the original topology just yet, but now I'm going to press X and just do a limited dissolve to just get rid of what can possibly not have to be here anymore. And so now that we have this rotated out in space and our geometry looks as terrible as possible, in fact, we'll jump over to EVHQ so the shadows also show us how terrible the surface looks. We can now press Q, go under mesh tools, and we just use dice. So we see that just normal dice isn't going to cut it for us. And this is one of those cases where an empty override would actually be needed for the surface. So using set origin, we now have the ability to press A to change the cursor mode, which has always been a thing, I just haven't talked about it yet. A again will change you over to empty mode, where basically we can drag from dot to dot, and we've basically created an empty that's actually oriented to this particular area that we've drawn the empty on. So from here we can actually select both objects, just tab this object in the local mode with the empty still selected. If we were to press Q and we go into dice, we see that our dice is a little bit stranger, but it actually is fitting this particular surface area that we're aiming to encompass. In fact, we may even want to try it from object mode just to make sure that we're actually encompassing this object. And we see that while it's being overshot a significant deal, it's also being reoriented to fit this particular object, but also taking the rotation of the empty into account. So I imagine in the future it'll get even more accurate, but from here we just want to roll the wheel. We could go into Boxalization, where basically we can ensure that every shape is going to be cut in the shape of a box. We could press tab in order to pause this operation, and by unchecking Boxalization we can then check the axis we want, thus keeping the count that we acquired from the Boxalization use. And so if we click, what you should expect is to go into edit mode, and the operation existed only on the geometry that we left visible. So previously I demonstrated how Boxcutter is also assisting in this regard, because there's some things that we just haven't put into the new dice yet, but Boxcutter is just primed for it, even though Boxcutter probably doesn't need topological correction written into its lore. Let's just ensure that we don't have any garbage selection in here. That edge doesn't need to be deselected. And when it comes to this process, it's real delicate, because if you end up deleting the wrong thing, you'll end up compromising the integrity of your circle. In fact, we want to dissolve that one just because it's just too close. Keep everything fairly quadrish. However, you know, some of these near edge loops I feel just don't even need to exist. So now we have something that looks a little bit better, but it could look even better. So let's press Alt H and bring back our original geometry that we had. I'm just going to select this loop, Control plus a couple of times, Shift tilde to grab the boundary loop, and we could just press Q. Or actually in this case, I actually enjoy using Mesh Machine's Boolean cleanup in this operation, where I will just go into it, roll the wheel once, and then move the cursor in order to just quickly dissolve the every other. It's kind of what I've been referring to them as. And then we can just slide some of these areas out. In fact, this area, we want to have a little bit of relaxation and the tension happening because it's just dissolving a little fast. So maybe something like that. And then we can just pull it back. The goal isn't to completely quadrify it, but really just to get some better topology flowing around here. So we see that our markings right now are based off of kind of protective boundaries, not really accurate. So instead of running Sharpen, I'm going to hold Control Shift, which will actually use Resharp, and that will clear out all the previous markings and then remark the edge as it's supposed to be. So we could even get in and get rid of this one. If we wanted to get really specific, we could extrude this area in, remove its marking, and then press Control F and go for grid fill. And we can just grid fill this area to something that's to our liking. And just like that, we were able to basically resurface this area. So if we were to press Q and we can go to bevel, we see that because we were able to protect the boundary of our geometry just right, we were able to promote this to bevel, and there was really no issue to it. In fact, we even take a step further. Let's press Control 1 and add a subdivision on top of it. And if we press Alt V and we look at the wireframe, we see that while subdivision is having a little bit of a time, it's able to at least accept this surface with the every other method that's being demonstrated here. Not saying that this is an acceptable topological method, but just to give a little bit of context to why Dice has the ability to have its orientation overridden with empties, and why Boxalization is important, and why local rotation support is also important, is because, you know, eventually I aim for Dice to not only be able to rotate to an area, but also to be able to conform along curves and other forms like that, and to be able to flow along particular shapes to give us exactly the topology that we want in a particular area. But with that, I believe you guys get the idea. Just like that, we're able to just get in, dice this area, replace this topology, correct it with minimal effort, using a little bit of Mesh Machine at the end, but hopefully you guys get the idea.